Hi everybody, John Meadows here. And today I wanted to show you a video, but it's not really video. I did a podcast with Mind Pump out in San Jose, California, and those guys are phenomenal. It is an incredible podcast. It gets over 1 million downloads a month. But we had a great conversation, and I was very open and direct and honest about any question they asked me. And the podcast has really went over well. I mean, we're getting hundreds of people every single day, just like, wow, I can't believe you guys talked about these subjects. And we talked about training and nutrition and things like that. We talked about the chemical use in bodybuilding and things like that. And I was very open and honest. But I wanted you to hear it. Like maybe you're doing your cardio or maybe you're driving and you can just set your phone down and play it. So you're not going to see a video with me doing anything, but I wanted you to hear the discussion on the podcast. It's going to be in 2 parts. We're going to break it up. This is part 1. But again, I think you'll really enjoy the discussion. It really went over well. And I'm sure we'll do another one soon. So without further ado, this is the podcast I did with Mind Pump out in California.
If you want to pump your body and expand your mind, there's only one place to go. Mind Pump. Mind Pump. With your hosts, Sal DiStefano, Adam Schaefer, and Justin Andrews.
Who was it that introduced this to John Meadows? Was it Shallow?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The first time, well, not the first time, but one of the first times that we met Shallow, and we were asking him people in the space that maybe we didn't know about that he likes or recommends, and he threw out John Meadows' name out there at that time. And at that point, I didn't know who he was. And so I started following him, and it was like maybe 6 months to a year later, do we start reaching out to coordinate him coming on the show, because I liked a lot of the content he was putting out. You know, he puts out a lot of good, you know,
He's
first,
a smart guy.
Yeah, at first glance, you see him and he looks massive, steroided out, bodybuilder guy. And you know, if you're somebody who is not into that space at all, you probably get turned off right away. But then the deeper you dive into the information that he's providing, he's a really fucking cool guy, and he's very intelligent, really, really smart.
He's got a gnarly physique too. I mean, the guy's just grainy and shredded looking. But what I liked about him was he's candid as hell. Like we asked him anything and everything, and the guy answered very honestly. So he talked about, of course, training, nutrition, and business, but then he talked about anabolic steroid use and drug use like growth hormone and insulin and EPO and other crazy stuff. Yeah. And he was super open and candid about it. So for you hardcore bodybuilding fans, you're going to love this episode. It was a lot of fun recording. You know, of course, I'm into it, so I had a good time with this guy. So if you want to check, and he's got a great YouTube and Instagram, by the way. If you want to check him out on YouTube or Instagram, both of them can be found at Mountain Dog 1. Mountain Dog and the number 1. Got a lot of videos, got a lot of posts, got a lot of followers, so you get some value out of following him, so you should definitely go check him out. And then his website is mountaindogdiet.com. And then how many days left until the promo is over, Doug?
5 days left.
So there's only 5 days for the 1 year of free access to the Mind Pump private forum if you enroll in any MAPS program. So here's what you do. You enroll in a MAPS program, pick the one that best suits your goals. So let's say your goal is to look like a bodybuilder. Let's say you want to shape and sculpt your body aesthetically. Well, that would be MAPS Aesthetic. Well, let's say rather than that, you're more interested in performance. You want to be able to move. You want to be able to jump. You want to be able to twist. You want lateral stability. You want speed and power. Well, that'd be MAPS Performance. Let's say you just want raw strength and size. Well, that might be MAPS Anabolic. Let's say you want to have a lot of fun in the gym, but you also like raw strength and size. MAPS Strong maybe for you. We have correctional exercise programs like MAPS Prime and MAPS Prime Pro and much more. Check out all of our programs. Find the one that's for you at mapsfitnessproducts.com. And this month, 5 days left. You have 5 days left. If you enroll in any of those programs, you'll get a free year of access to our private forum. In the forum is personal trainers, fitness enthusiasts, there's doctors, and then, of course, the best part is Justin, Adam, myself, and Doug are on there daily to answer questions and help people out. Again, go check that out, mapsfitnessproducts.com. And that's it. So without any further ado, here we are interviewing John Meadows. Hold on, what is that?
I hear that too. It was like a...
What is that? Was that you breathing?
No, I'm not breathing right now.
All right.
It's usually you. Yeah.
It's usually this is Adam the whole time.
What? I have not been like that in a long time.
I don't know, dude.
When I was competing, dude, when you're walking around with fucking...
Yeah, you're right.
When you're like walking around like that, it's hard not to... Look at this. You know, whenever
He's not breathing
Dude,
crazy.
Jordan Shallow every time he's like,
Jordan Shallow breathes.
Yeah, when
He's
Jordan...
a heavy breather.
Yes.
He's a mouth. He does a little bit of the mouth.
He's a
breathing.
big guy. He's a really big guy.
But John, you're jacked. I don't
I know,
know you're
you're a
breathing
big
all
guy.
crazy.
Man, I'm only 225. I used to roll around 260. So
Oh my! How tall are you?
5'7" on a good day.
260, 5'7".
Yeah.
You were as wide as you were tall.
I took a lot of Pop-Tarts, man.
That's a lot of meat.
Yeah.
You earlier we were joking around and you were saying you had to go to the bathroom and then you made a fart joke and you said you can't fart because you don't have a colon.
That just blew my mind. Right
Yeah.
there.
Tell us that whole story about how that all happened. I read a little bit about on your biography about that whole deal.
Right.
What was that? What happened with that whole deal there?
Yeah, so in 2005, I was preparing for the Mr. USA, and about 5 weeks out doing my cardio, I noticed that I get about 30 minutes into my cardio, and I felt like I had to use the bathroom, right? So I'd run back to the house, and nothing would come out. I'd be like, man, that's weird. And then it kind of turned into like a little bit of abdominal pain. So it got worse and worse and worse and worse. And then pretty soon, anytime I'd eat a meal, there'd be about 10 or 15 minutes where it physically hurt. So I thought, this is just stress induced, right? You know, most of these stomach issues we have, a lot of it's just brought on by stress. So I figure I'll go do the contest. I'll come back. I'll be fine. So I went and did the Mr. USA. By that time, I couldn't even really eat. I got home. Like, okay, cool. Now it's over. I'm going to be fine. And then 2 or 3 days later, I went to see my doctor, and he saw me walking into his office, and he called the Life Squad. He's like, he's known me for many, many years. He's like, something bad is happening.
So he could tell right away by looking at you?
He looked at me.
What was it that he saw?
I don't know.
Okay.
This dude, I mean, he's been my doctor since 1999. He knows me really well.
Okay.
So the ambulance comes and gets me. They take me to the hospital, and the hospital runs me through a whole battery of tests, and they say, we know what's wrong with him. He's constipated. I said, I don't know if I believe that because I haven't ate for 3 or 4 days. Like, I don't, there's something. So then I saw some more specialists, and they said, he has ulcerative colitis. And I said, I don't know. I've got a little bit of medical background. I'm not really showing any symptoms of colitis at all. This is something else. Now you don't know what you're talking about. Trust me, you have colitis. I said, okay. So long story short, the pain got worse and worse and worse. Another couple of days later, I was back in the emergency room. By that point, I was kind of curled up in a ball, and this is where it gets real intense. So I'm in a bed, laying there in a hospital bed, and I said, I think something bad's about to happen. And I stand up, and a blob of coagulated blood comes out of my butt, and it lands on the hospital floor. And
oh God, that had to scare the shit out of you, like literally.
Yeah. So I'm looking at that, and I'm just like, I can feel myself getting kind of lightheaded. I'm like, I'm done. That's it. Like this is the end of my life. And then I see the nurse looks at it, and I just see her eyes, and she takes off running out of the room. I'm like, oh, this is it. I'm in my early 30s. I had a good life, but it's over. So my wife was with me, and I said, you have a notebook with you? So she has a notebook. I said, I'm going to give you some messages to give to my friends. So I start giving her messages like, make sure you tell James I'm going to miss him. So, I mean, in my mind, I'm done.
Wow.
So the doctors come back in, they put me on the bed, and they're running down the hall with me. And the next thing I know, I wake up in ICU. And there's all these pretty nurses in there, and it was the weirdest thing in the world because I woke up and I thought I remembered where I had left off. I'm like, am I alive? And they're like, yeah, you're alive. And I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, you're alive. And I was so happy because I thought I was going to die, right? So I'm super happy. And the nurse was like, wow, we've never seen somebody so happy in here. And I was like, no, you don't. I mean, I was pretty sure I was going to die. And, I had tubes in me, and I had an ileostomy that they did a temporary ileostomy. And so the doctor comes in, he's like, yeah, your colon there was so much blood. Well, I just got rid of the whole thing. And now your ileum's connected to your anus. And I was like, oh, okay. All right. Well, I guess I need to do some reading up and see what all this stuff means. So that was one of the things actually that drove me to really learn about digestion. I'm like, I probably should know this stuff well now.
Do you know, now leading up to this, were you not going to the bathroom? Were there any signs besides the pain that there was something going on?
Have you ever ate so much fish, you had that oily stuff come out when you use the bathroom? I had that happening. Okay. But as a bodybuilder, you think, well, that's just the
I'm eating a lot of fish.
Yeah, right. That's what you think. You think I'm eating a lot of fish. But it turns out it was the colon trying to kind of clean itself and just trying to fix something. And, long story short, I went through a ton of tests, man. They stuck a camera down my throat and my hip. I mean, everything you can think of. So many blood tests. And they couldn't figure out what was wrong, which is kind of scary because when you don't know what's wrong, it's kind of like, well, how do I know it's not going to happen again? Mm-hmm. And so they sent some of the tissue. They sent a tissue to the Mayo Clinic, and Mayo Clinic said, yeah, we've got 9 cases of this on file. So they tell me what it was: idiopathic myointimal hyperplasia of the mesenteric vein. I'm like, that's a lot of big words. I have no clue what that means. Can you tell me what that means?
That's basically saying what it is, but they don't know what causes it.
Right, idiopathic. So no cause. And
which is a scientist's way of saying we don't know.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, that's it.
They're clueless.
Long-winded way of saying it.
I'm not feeling very good about that, right? And I look up the other cases and I see the symptoms. I'm like, that's it. That's exactly what I had. Like everything that these people went through is what I felt. So the good news was, out of the 9 cases, only 2 died, 7 lived. The 2 that died weren't as fortunate to me to be in the hospital when they had an issue, but it was a disease that affects the sigmoid part of your colon specifically. But at that point, it had went so long, and those veins literally just like explode.
Wow.
Pressure builds up in them. And in the rest of my digestive system, the veins and arteries are like, you look like you're 18 years old. It's just those specific mesenteric veins that had this. So it was really bizarre. It was pretty intense.
Now, anytime a bodybuilder, especially a pro bodybuilder, a high-level competitive bodybuilder, has some kind of a health issue, people point to the bodybuilding lifestyle, including the food, the high-protein intake, the supplements, and including the anabolic steroids. Was there anything that you were doing that you think could have contributed to any of this? Or were you ever, at any point, were you sitting there going, oh, man, did I do this to myself?
Oh, 100%, man. 100%. I've always been a big believer that if you're going to use GH, you want to use pharma grade GH, right? You want to use the good stuff. And at the time, I was using some generic GH, which is known to have impurities. So I'm thinking that I'd take some GH to cause this. I was experimenting with EPO at the time, Epigen. And that can increase your red blood cell count. I'm thinking, did that have anything to do with it? So I don't know. I mean, and I was eating a lot of food, that was back when I was younger and I was pounding down food because that's what we were taught. We were taught that you have to, there is no, forget about digestion. You just have to get calories down any way you can get them down. So that's how I had tried to grow through those, my younger years. it's a game of calories, right? You just got to eat more and more and more. So, not paying any attention to your digestion or anything like that. So, yeah, I thought about all those things and, it's like, do I ever want to compete again? And at some point I thought, and I was terrified, but I was like, let me try this again with a little different approach. And luckily nothing ever bad happened again and everything was fine, but man, it was scary as hell. Yeah, absolutely.
How did you change your approach coming back?
Well, so I looked at it a lot of different ways. I looked at it from the food part. And we used what I just called it the power shove method, just power shove calories down. So I started paying attention and learning about prebiotics and probiotics and things like that. And, helping your gut flora and the benefit that has. And I didn't really care about those things before, but all of a sudden I thought, man, then maybe I should look into this. If you're full, you don't eat again, right? Let your food digest. Some of it was common sense. Some of it was educating myself. From a chemical perspective, is like, do I need that EPO? I probably don't need that. Am I ever going to use generic growth hormone again? Absolutely not. So, honestly, the chemicals that I use in bodybuilding, I made sure they were from a doctor with a prescription and clean, not somebody making them in a bathtub. And then, I had another perspective too. I was working at Chase at the time. I was running very large projects for JP Morgan Chase, and I think it was a pretty stressful position. So I'm a big believer that stress can absolutely destroy your body, destroy everything. So I had a little different perspective too. When I woke up in ICU, what I used to consider a big deal wasn't such a big deal to me now. So I'd go to work at Chase, and whereas before, I'm running these projects with these big teams and people have issues and problems come up. And Chase was a very intense atmosphere, very intense, very production oriented. The culture was very intense. And so everything was a really big deal. You'd stay there, you'd work until something was done. And there was really no working hours. You just worked hard nonstop. So I went back to Chase, had a very different perspective. And it actually helped my career because then I became the guy who was calm under fire. But my perspective was very different, right? It wasn't, are customers being impacted right now? No. Okay, well then go home, get some rest, come back, we'll fix it tomorrow. It was so I changed the way my perception of things was very different. And to this day, I'm a very low stress guy. Like things just aren't that big of a deal to me now that used to be, So, I looked at it from a bunch of different perspectives, like stress. What's really a big deal? Losing a family member is a big deal. But trying to decide whether you're going to get, tuna in oil or tuna in water is not so much of a big deal, right? And then, for the chemical part and the food part, all that stuff, kind of played into my thoughts moving forward.
Yeah, years ago, I had my body rebelled on me a little bit, and it changed my approach completely to my training and to my nutrition. And the side effect of that, and not that I was even focusing on it, because at the time I just want to get healthy, which I'm sure right after that you're like, I just want to get healthy. The side effect of that was I became so much more in tune with my body that I'm able now to get better levels of just fitness and conditioning and aesthetics than I ever was before, because I'm more in tune. Have you found that with yourself as well?
Absolutely, 1,000%. And what I can do now, I probably have 150 grams of protein a day now. You have any bodybuilder in here, they'll tell you.
Oh, a guy your size is going to have 300 grams.
Yeah,
easy.
Absolutely. I've lost no strength. Right before I went to the airport yesterday, I was hack squatting rock bottom with 6 plates for reps. Same thing I did when I was in my 20s, eating 6,000 calories a day. Yeah, you get in tune with your body and things start working for you instead of against you. I find the exact same thing, for sure.
Yeah, it's some of the stuff that bodybuilding and training teaches us that is valuable also sometimes becomes, in my opinion, a big problem. Like one of them is, like you'll find no athlete that can be as disciplined when it comes to nutrition as a pre-contest bodybuilder. The discipline that a pre-contest bodybuilder has is just, it's almost not human. The problem with that then becomes the ignoring the signals of the body and just push. That becomes a problem. So there's that kind of that duality of it, which I think is a big issue. And then some of the other stuff is the excesses, like we just talked about protein. Like what are some of the biggest mistakes you see with people trying to build muscle and get stronger and all that stuff that now is just bullshit?
The number one thing is people want to happen overnight. Back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, the culture was very different. It was, I'm going to do what it takes for as long as it takes to get there. And it might be 10 years. It might be 15 years. I did 16 pro qualifiers before I turned pro. And if you talk to people now, I get the guys that come to me now like, hey, man, I want to be a pro. I'm like, okay, have you ever competed? They're like, no. Like, you don't understand what it takes. And so what happens when you have that mindset is if you want to get there that fast, it becomes an extreme game. I'm going to pound a ton of drugs, I'm going to pound a ton of food, and I'm going to make this happen overnight. And you see that happen. And you see guys that they're shooting stars, and then they become very well known, and then they disappear. And you don't hear about these guys. I know what goes on with my peers, these other pros, a lot of kidney problems, people on dialysis, and you don't really hear about it, but there's a lot of pros that are frying their bodies, right? As opposed to taking a little more intelligent approach. It might take you a few more years, but you know what? You'll probably live an extra 15 years, who knows? But so I think the number one place that I always start with when I'm talking to younger guys is trying to teach them patience and persistence. Like, man, this is going to take some time, right? It's going to take some time. And then we were always taught the Power Chef food and things like that. So it was, I used to train at a gym when I was in college. The World Gym is the best gym in Columbus, Ohio. I actually transferred colleges just to train at that gym.
I worked out there once when I went to go watch the Arnold Classic. That gym is amazing.
That gym was awesome.
Yeah.
It's a bingo place now. That gym was awesome. That's where I grew up. And there was right across the street, there was a buffet. So I would train, I was training with some powerlifters. These guys, so when I was in my early 20s, there was a hardcore group of guys there that lifted. There were bodybuilders and powerlifters. There were people there that would compete in a bodybuilding show and a powerlifting show on the same day, on the same weekend. They were
just savages.
These dudes were animals. And, I was, 20, 21 years old, and they saw how hard I worked. And these were all these big black guys, right? And they're little white boy Johnny, man, that boy can work, so they liked me. They kind of took me under their wing. So we would train, and then we would walk across the street to the buffet, and it was pile up as many chicken breasts as you can on the plate. So Big Nick would eat 14 chicken breasts, Big Phil would eat 16 chicken breasts.
Are these real numbers you just throwing out?
No, these are real numbers.
At one sitting? Oh
yeah, no, these guys are like...
How many grams of protein is that, Adam? That's like,
it's a lot. It's a lot.
That's 500, 600 grams right there in one sitting.
These guys were animals, man. They were animals. And I'd be like, oh, there's 4. Can I get 5 down? So we would just eat and eat and eat. And, sometimes okay, let's go to Bob Evans before we train. I'm like, all right. So, we're getting the biscuits and gravy and more and more and more and just pounding down calories, but it was very different. We also trained really, people now, they're so scared of overtraining. And I'm like, if you walk into any gym, the last thing you see is overtraining. You just see people texting. Like, it just cracks me up. Everybody's so scared to overtrain. I'm like, you guys have no idea. First of all, overtraining doesn't happen in one workout. It's a period of time, and people don't even really know what overtraining really is. But the mentality is very different now, too. So going back to your original question, people don't be so scared to just work hard. Like, if you tell a guy now to take 2 sets to failure, they're like, are you sure, man? You sure my CNS can recover from 2 sets to failure? I'm like, God, gee, many Christmas, guys. Come on, man. What I like about going to the gym, what I've always loved is I actually take a little pride in being able to do things that I don't think other human beings can do. And that may not be pushing the heaviest weight. It may be taking yourself past the level of pain that most people just can't handle. And I always took a lot of pride in that. I could put 900 on a leg press and find a way to do 40 reps with it. Stand up, catch my breath, and, I'd have 400 on a squat rack. We would actually superset leg presses and squats. Because why? Because it's retarded, right? Nobody else can do that. And I had, when I was in my early 20s, I had 30-inch legs that were very good. They were at the top of the national level even at a young age. And that was because that's what my mentality was. I was smart enough to know that I didn't have the wide clavicles and a narrow hip structure. Like, I'm going to have to put on a lot of hard conditioned, gnarly muscle to ever be competitive as a pro. I knew that from a young age. I knew I wasn't Flex Wheeler. But I looked up to guys like Tom Platz, the guys who really could take their training to another level, man. Like, they would not leave the gym until they knew they had won. And that's kind of the mentality I always had. It was, I'm not leaving this gym until I've, put everything I had into it. And a lot of people would watch my videos and they'd say, you're doing too much. I'd say, okay, that's fine. I'll just keep doing too much, but it's working. You always try to learn, and my approach is a little different now, but I wouldn't for one second take back the way I've trained for many, many years.
Don't you think that or what I've seemed to find is that, like you said, you walk in the gym and it's very rare that you see a bunch of, especially in like a 24-hour fitness or a basic gym, there's not a lot of signs of overtraining, especially in the weight room area. But in the competitive bodybuilding world, that's where I would see if something like that would be abused because of the mentality. I think the average population needs one message, and then like the bodybuilding community needs another message. I used to say this about even protein intake. Like, most of the clients that I got that was a 40-year-old soccer mom with 3 kids, she was under consuming protein, and so I was always trying to get her to eat more protein.
Right.
But then when I was talking to my peers in the bodybuilding world, I was like, whoa, dude, that's way over what you need to. So it seems like there's this, there's this conflicting message, because there's one group of people that are probably abusing protein, abusing intensity. And then there's a other group of people that need more intensity in their life and need more protein in their life. I think that's probably what makes it really difficult, is you hear guys like us have a conversation like this, And people are going, well, fuck, what is it? Do I need to push harder, or do I need to back off, or do I need to eat more protein or eat less protein?
Yeah, right.
And I find that that's what's most common. It seems to be that, you know, what we tend to gravitate towards, or whatever group that we fall into, there's extremes in both those, whether it be the lack of intensity or too much of intensity, or the lack of protein or too much protein.
Well, I think people don't realize that there's a right dose. You know what I mean? Like, it's not more is better. It's not like money, you know, the more you get, the better. It's there's a right dose, the right amount. So, like, talking about protein intake, for example, at some point your body becomes so desensitized, you might as well be eating carbs and fats. You're just using it as energy, except that proteins take a little bit more processes to go through the body and can actually be detrimental at the extremely high levels. I know, you know, most people eat high protein diets, totally fine. But if you're a bodybuilder and you're consuming 400 and 500 grams, I remember reading articles about, like, guys, rest in peace, like Nasser El Sambadi would consume 500-600 grams of protein, a day. There's no studies to show what that can do to you long term, and there's also no studies to show that that's even beneficial.
Right.
You know, it's kind of that right dose. Are you starting to figure that out now about your body? Like, okay, there's a right dose where my body just seems to do the best.
I think so. And the other thing is, just because something works for you at one point in time, your own body changes too.
Good point.
And,
very good point.
You know, my typical breakfast is 2 eggs and 2 pieces of toast. And people are like, man, that's crazy. That's not enough food. I'm like, I feel great with that breakfast. So, and sometimes I'll be like, oh, I'm going to do it like the old days. I'm going to eat 6 eggs. And I do that. And I feel terrible. You know, it's not saying that 6 eggs is wrong for somebody. It's just where you're at the time. I think, again, to my earlier point, just because something works at one point in your life doesn't mean that's what's going to be right. So to me, this is a constant game of just like, where am I at now? What's going on? And you're just always in this evaluation mode, like all the time, nonstop, even now, you know, even with the workouts, with diets, with stress, with sleep. I'm a big proponent in sleep. I do a lot of seminars where I talk about sleep and sleep quality and all that stuff. I mean, all these things all together, you realize as you get older, like, you know, you can't ignore. The older you get, when you ignore one of these things, it has a real big snowball effect.
Yeah, it's compounding for sure.
It compounds, right? So a lot of the things now are very important to me. I didn't used to think about before. I just didn't really care.
What do you think are some of the big missing pieces in bodybuilding, bodybuilders, I guess, regimens? Do you think like digestion and sleep or two? Because I know a lot of bodybuilders talk about, you're hearing more and more now talk about definitely digestive health. I know we had Stan Efferding on the show, and he was talking a lot about 5-10 years ago, but there was no talk about how to digest your food properly, taking things like probiotics and food quality. It was only about macros, proteins, fats, carbohydrates, and calories. Do you think that that's still a big missing piece? And what do you think happens when bodybuilders start to figure that out for themselves? What do you think happens to that?
Well, Stan is definitely right. Things are much different now. I remember in around 2007, I was on a board. This is kind of where my name kind of started to get out there. It was professionalmuscle.com was the board. And there were a lot of pros on it. It was a great board. And I wrote this. I was sitting at Chase one day, and I'd been learning a lot about things like farmed versus salmon versus wild-caught salmon, and grass-fed beef versus conventionally fed beef. I'd been learning a lot about this. Actually, through a doctor friend of mine, Dr. Serrano, who was teaching me this stuff in the 90s, and then I'd never even heard of that. Like, what's an omega-3 enriched egg? Like, how do you do that? Like, are you feeding your chickens fish? You know, I didn't know, right? This is all new to me. So I started. I found a farm. I started drinking raw milk. I found another guy who had chickens. I started and I've always been very religious about my labs, my blood work. And so I started watching the changes in my labs. Like, man, this got better. This got better. This got
really?
better. It was very, very... And
just from changing the quality, not necessarily
it was a very, very big change. Very big changes in my lipid panel, in my hemoglobin A1C, fasting glucose, all that stuff. All started changing for the better. And the nurse at the doctor's office, she's sitting there looking at this stuff, and she's like, what are you doing different? Like, I don't understand how this stuff is changing. And I said, well, I started cooking in coconut oil. And she's like, well, isn't that
mostly saturated fat. And I said, yeah, but it's a little different. You can't just look at it as a bad fat. There's some very, very good qualities to it. You know, I'm getting my chickens from a farm now. She's like, you're eating all the yolks? Aren't those bad for you? I'm like, that's debatable. You know, we can talk about that. I don't necessarily think they're bad for you, though. And the meats and so this stuff like kind of opened my eyes. So in 2007 on that message board, I wrote, this is the kind of diet I'm following. And if you guys want to try it. But for me, it's worked really well. I feel really good. And so people gravitated toward that. And my handle on the internet was Mountain Dog. And that's because I love Bernese Mountain Dogs. I've always had Bernese Mountain Dogs, just a dog breed I love. And people started calling that Mountain Dog Diet this and that name. People just started calling it that. And that's kind of how that whole name came to be. It was from that message board. So back in 2007, you know, people were like, wow, man, this is different. Like I didn't know that, you know, farm raised tilapia might not be the healthiest fish in the world because nobody was even looking at that stuff. So it kind of started growing from there. And now I think people are much more aware of this stuff. And, but for me, it was, you know, I'm one of those guys, I love to learn, but I want to see what it's doing in my body. And those labs were very good indicators, clear indicators that there were some positive changes taking place from those changes.
When you do these, because I know you do a lot of seminars, right? We our good friend, Dr. Jordan Shallow recommended you because you guys did. Are these the things you talk about in your seminar? What are some of the things you cover?
I cover everything. I do workshops, 2-3 day workshops where we talk about training, we talk about sleep, we talk about stress, we talk about nutrition. I talk about drugs. I talk about everything. Nothing's off limits. And if it's a topic I don't know something about, I just tell people I'm not educated on that. I'm not going to give you an opinion. I can give you an opinion, but you need to know I'm not educated on it. So I try to cover. And what I do when I go to seminars is like I'm not saying I know everything and I'm right. I just share my experience. Like these are my experiences. Take it for what it's worth. If you think some of this stuff you might want to try it, try it. If you don't, hey, that's cool too. Thanks for coming to my seminar. But I just try to share a lot of the experience I've had. You know, I started competing when I was 13 years old. So I've been, you know, I'm 46 now. So I've been around this for a long time. And I think some of the things I've learned, I mean, I think I've learned a lot, but I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, a lot of mistakes. And I think when you've made a lot of mistakes and actually learn from them, then you can build a pretty good base of knowledge to share with people.
What made you want to start competing at such a young age? That's most
magazines.
Start, really,
magazines. I was into pro wrestling, right? Remember the Road Warriors?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Oh, dude, Road Warrior Hawk and Road Warrior Animal. Man, I wanted to be Road Warrior Hawk. He was awesome. And you know, there was the guys back then. You guys remember Tony Atlas?
Yeah.
You know, Junkyard Dog.
Yeah.
So you guys got to check out my Instagram. So I'm doing some Ultimate Warrior chair shots. I'm hitting people in the back. I just hit Mike Rashid a couple weeks ago. You guys know Mike, right? Do you know guys? You know Juji Mufu?
Yeah.
Juji came and saw me, and I blasted him with a chair. So, anyways, I love professional wrestling, and you know there was Ivan Putski, there was all kinds of big guys back then, right? And so I always went. My grandmother took me to the store, and I would go to the magazine rack, and I would get the pro wrestling magazines. I would just sit down. I would sit there and read them while she shopped. And one day I saw Muscle and Fitness, so I pulled it down, I looked at it, and boom, just like that. I was like, it was Lee Haney, and I was like, I want to look like that. You know, I wasn't getting picked on. I wasn't trying to impress girls. There was just something about the look of the muscle that I really. So what happened was I saved up and I bought one of those magazines and I took it to school with me. And I'm showing everybody in class and I'm thinking they're all going to get excited. They're going to be like, oh, that's awesome. And every person to the T said, that's gross. I don't want to look like that. Every single person. And I was like, now I want to do it even more because I don't care what you think. Right? So I, from a very young age, I wanted to be a pro bodybuilder. And I watched ESPN they had the Mr. Olympia on TV that year. It was a 1985 Mr. Olympia in Brussels, Belgium.
Is that the one they drug tested? Was that the first one?
No, that came later.
That was later on.
That came later. But it was when Lee Haney won. And of course, that's when Gaspar he just won the Nationals and he was in his early 20s. He got third place. And then you had Albert Beckles, who nobody really knew how old he was, but they suspected he was around 55 at the time. He got second place. So a lot of great bodybuilders in that era. And I watched that over and over. And I can tell you the top 10 placings right off the top of my head from that show. And then also in 1986 when they had it in Columbus, actually. And that was when Tom Platz brought the audience to this fevered pitch where they were all standing and screaming. But anyways, so right then, boom, I want to do this. I competed at 13 years old. I was 119 pounds. And I just loved it, man. And I was in a lot of sports, and I really wanted to be a pro football player. And then I realized I don't have the talent to go to the next level in that sport. I was also in track. Wasn't talented enough in track to go to the next level. But bodybuilding was something where I thought, you know what? If I work really hard at this, I might be able to do okay. And it seemed like a sport where I could overcome some genetic flaws and possibly be successful. I still wasn't sure, but I knew I loved the way it made me feel. I knew I loved to work hard. By the time I left high school, I was squatting 500 pounds. Damn. And at the time I was natural. I'd never taken a drug before. I'd never seen a drug before. But I was working hard. I mean, football practice, we'd run the mile. I'd win the mile on the team. And then we'd go into this weight room and I would out squat everybody too. And it was just that pushing myself and that muscle it was like a disease. I caught it and I could never get rid of it again.
When did you start using anabolics? Because you said you were natural throughout high school, squatting 500 pounds, which is insane. At what age did you start using anabolics, and how fast did you see your body change after that?
Yeah, so it was in my early 20s, and I was in college. I was very anti-anabolic. You know, I was one of those guys that said if you take a shot of testosterone, you're going to die from a heart attack in a week. And I started to educate myself. You guys remember the anabolic reference guide and all those things?
Oh, man, are you kidding me? Yeah. Absolutely.
Those were I started reading those things, and I thought, man, maybe this stuff isn't as bad as I thought it was.
Because you had a lot of the fear stuff going on, too, like Lyle Alzado.
Yes, and exactly. Death in the Locker Room. Remember that book, Death in the Locker Room?
Yeah.
I think Goldman wrote that book?
I think so.
But it was, so I was in that camp. I was the guy. I was like, well, I'm natural. I'm natural. I was all proud of being natural. And then I started reading. I was like, maybe this stuff isn't as bad as I thought. So my weightlifting partner, his dad was a veterinarian, right? So he comes to the gym one day and he's like, John, I know you've been reading about all this stuff, and I was looking on my dad's vet truck and he has some Winstrol and Equipoise. And I was like, ooh, that Winstrol sounds good. And I was in college, right? So I didn't have a lot of money. And he said, I'll snag a 30cc bottle of Winstrol for you for $50. And I was like, cool, I'll put together $50. So I gave him $50. I got my 30cc bottle of Winstrol. It was 50 milligrams per milliliter. And I was, 30, so that was 60 shots. So what I did was I remember I took one shot every other day. So 50 milligrams every other day. That was all I took. And I competed, and I was in my early 20s, and I won the shows I did. I was in the men's class. I was 20 years old. I was almost 21. But I won the light heavyweight and overall with perfect scores in both of the shows I did.
And that's a relatively low dose of a steroid that's not even that strong. That's
right. That was just Winstrol. That was so 50 milligrams. So 1 week would be 200 milligrams, and the next week would be 150 milligrams.
Did you see, now were you a hyper responder? Because I know some
Absolutely,
people.
Man.
Okay. So some guys, and we should talk about that, because I know guys that'll take a gram of stuff and will gain like 5 pounds.
Yeah.
And I know other guys that'll just look at a bottle of something and then they'll gain 15 pounds of muscle.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. Just to be completely candid with you guys, I always responded very well to lower doses. The first time I took testosterone, I saved up some money and I bought 6 ready jack. Remember the old Salsonon ampules from Mexico?
Oh gosh,
the ones that came in the 18 gauge needles. We called them harpoons,
cannons,
or cannons. Yeah. So I bought 6 of those. And I took one shot every 10 days. So that was 250 milligrams every 10 days. Now, a normal HRT dose for guys now is usually like, 150, 200 milligrams a week. I took 250 every 10 days and I blew up. I was like, this is amazing. Like my coach, I didn't tell him. He's like, are you doing anything? I'm like, well, I don't know, man. I mean, yeah, no. I mean, he's like, well, are you injecting any steroids? I'm like, yeah. He's like, but then you are. I go, okay. I thought maybe the dose was so low I could technically say I'm not really. But so I did. I took 6 ampules of Salsonon, man, and just like, bam.
Now, what do you think that is? Do you think it's like androgen receptor density in the body?
Could
do you think it's because it's really weird?
I have this theory that especially someone like you, I think part of it, there's a genetic component that some people are just hyper responders. But then I also think that you laid a very solid foundation
training
before you did that. And so
the body's just primed.
Yeah, it's just ready for that. And where I see the mistake I see a lot of kids do now is, like you said earlier, you alluded to, is just they want the results so fast. It's like they're just starting to get in the gym and like already we're taking 500 milligrams of testosterone. It's like, whoa, dude, why don't you lay a foundation, learn the principles and the big rocks in this whole journey of getting huge before you start throwing the chemicals on there. So sometimes I wonder if it was just the path you took, that it sounds like you laid a very solid foundation first, and then you start. I mean, when you talk about the Kai Greens, the Ronnie Colemans, like a lot of these guys, I mean, they went on pro fucking natural, and then they pulled on that, and then look what happens, right? So
yeah, and resistance training has been shown in studies, if you do it consistently for a long period of time, to increase androgen receptor density. So you are in essence priming your body to hyper respond. You know, whatever your limit is, whatever your genetic limit is, you're priming it to reach that upper limit with how it responds to anabolic hormones, and then you take them, and then you get this crazy. Because I literally know people. I mean, I've been in the fitness industry for over 20 years professionally, and I knew guys that would take insane amounts of gear, and you wouldn't even be able to tell if you looked at them on the street. And I knew other guys that would, you know, the original Mr. Olympia competitors, like Larry Scott. Those guys were taking 5 and 10 milligram tablets of D-ball a day, which is like, that's nothing. It's like a Tic Tac,
right?
Every single day. And you obviously look at pictures of Larry Scott, and the guy looked absolutely incredible. So it's really crazy to me that, you know, how that happens. So you responded just gangbusters right out the gates.
I did. But, you know, and I had built a really good foundation, man. I was training like an animal. And there's all kinds of theories, you know, more satellite cells. You know, Schoenfeld talks a lot about that too, with gear and all that. But I do think that foundation part is critical, man. I really do.
The reason why I feel this way too is my own experience. So I was the dumb kid who took it early and too much of it, trying to be big. I started training around 16, 17, probably around 17 years old when I got real serious around 18, 19. Became a trainer by the time I was 20 years old. Trained for a couple of years consistently as a personal trainer. And at that time, I was always the skinny kid trying to build muscle. I was convinced that the thing that separated me from the guys that cover the magazines was steroids. That must be what it is. Like I've never gotten my body down to 3 or 4% body fat. I've never looked like this. I've struggled to put muscle on. I train hard. I thought I ate well. But the truth was, I really didn't. I had a very small understanding of programming. I had a very small understanding of nutrition, yet I thought I did. And I went the anabolic route, and I took a fuck ton. And I actually didn't see hardly any results. I didn't see shit, really. In fact, it just made me leaner. I got lean and strong. Like I was strong in the gym. All of a sudden, I was lifting more weights, but I didn't get the results I wanted. I didn't put on 10 pounds or 30 pounds of muscle like I was chasing it for. And I tried it 2 or 3 times and had a terrible experience and just was very frustrated with it. Now, fast forward 10 years later of education and training and laying a foundation, and then like, oh, okay, I started to piece this together. So when I was competing and I first started, I mean, I was taking 250 milligrams of testosterone, and I competed and made all the way to the professional level at that dosage. It wasn't until I became a pro did I start to take 500 milligrams of testosterone, and that's all I had to take to be on stage with the best of the best. And it was like, really the answer wasn't the drugs. It was, I didn't really understand nutrition. I didn't really understand programming. I didn't have a solid foundation when I was 21 years old yet. It took those years of understanding nutrition, years of programming, and years of just time under the iron to lay a foundation. And then my body seemed to respond. So I tend to lean that direction, that I feel like, sure, there's some of a genetic component that some guys are responders, but I really feel like the guys that respond very, very well are the ones that really laid the foundation well, and the ones that don't tend to really be missing the other pieces that are as important, if not more important than the drugs.
Well,
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. If you didn't get to listen to part 1 and part 2, I'm going to put a link up here, the playlist, so you can listen to the other part. But again, thank you so much for listening. Hopefully it helped you get to a cardio, an otherwise boring cardio session, or a long drive or something like that. Appreciate it, and we will see you next time.